Sherlock Holmes and the Enigma of the Shimmering Waltz. Chapter 1. A Curious Invitation. The December fog clung to the window panes of 221B Baker Street with the persistence of an unwelcome guest. I had spent the afternoon organizing my medical notes by the crackling fire while my friend Sherlock Holmes remained hunched over his chemistry apparatus, occasionally muttering to himself as various solutions changed colors beneath his careful ministrations. For 3 weeks, no case of significance had presented itself, and I had begun to recognize the telltale signs of restlessness in my companion's demeanor, his fingers drumming impatiently upon any surface within reach, his gray eyes taking on that distant, hungry look that spoke of a mind starving for stimulation. "Watson," he said suddenly, breaking our companionable silence, "would you be so kind as to hand me that letter on the mantelpiece, the one with the peculiar violet seal?" I retrieved the envelope, noting its fine quality and unusual scent of lavender. "I don't recall seeing this arrive." It came with the morning post. I set it aside, suspecting it might prove more interesting than the tedious correspondence that has plagued us of late. Holmes extended his hand without looking up from his experiment. As he broke the seal, I observed a subtle shift in his expression, the nearly imperceptible raising of an eyebrow that indicated interest. He read the contents twice before passing the letter to me. "What do you make of it, Watson?" The note was written in an elegant hand on thick cream stationery embossed with an unfamiliar coat of arms. "Mr. Holmes, I write to you in utmost distress regarding a matter of extraordinary delicacy. My daughter's life and reputation hang in the balance due to circumstances beyond comprehension. The singular nature of this affair, I believe, will appeal to your professional curiosity. I shall call upon you tomorrow at 11 o'clock, if convenient. With desperate gratitude, Lady Adelaide Montgomery, Thornfield Hall, Sussex, Montgomery," I mused. "The name sounds vaguely familiar." "As well it might," Holmes replied, setting aside his chemical apparatus with newfound energy. "Lord Montgomery is prominent in diplomatic circles, particularly in matters concerning Eastern Europe. His appointment as special envoy to the Austro-Hungarian Empire has caused quite a stir. And Lady Montgomery? A woman of considerable intellect, the daughter of a renowned mathematician. She has published scholarly papers on cryptography under a male pseudonym and was once engaged to a Germanic crown prince before mysteriously withdrawing." I stared at him in astonishment. "How could you possibly know such details?" A thin smile played across his lips. "I make it my business to know things about people who might prove relevant to my work, Watson. The Montgomerys' connections. Place them at the nexus of power and intrigue. Fertile ground for the sort of problems that eventually find their way to my doorstep." The following morning brought weak winter sunlight filtering through dissipating fog. At precisely 11 o'clock, Mrs. Hudson announced our visitor. Lady Adelaide Montgomery swept into our sitting room with quiet dignity. Despite her composed demeanor, the shadows beneath her eyes betrayed recent sleepless nights. "Mr. Holmes," she said, extending her gloved hand, "I cannot express my gratitude for receiving me on such short notice." Holmes guided her to a chair. "Please, Lady Montgomery, tell us what brings you to Baker Street with such urgency." She removed her gloves, revealing a slight tremor. "It concerns my daughter, Sophia. She is 20 years old and, until recently, the picture of health and happiness. 3 weeks ago, she began to exhibit disturbing behaviors." "In what way disturbing?" Holmes prompted. "It began after the Winterbourne Ball, an annual event hosted by the Duchess of Marlborough. Sophia returned home somehow altered. She spoke of strange music and lights that no one else noticed." Lady Montgomery paused. "The following day, she took to her bed with a fever. When she recovered, she was different. Withdrawn. She spends hours humming the same haunting waltz repeatedly." "And you believe something occurred at this ball?" I am certain of it. Sophia cannot, or will not, tell us what happened. When pressed, she becomes agitated and insists she is waiting for the next dance. 5 days ago, she disappeared in the night. We found her the next morning in our garden pavilion, barefoot despite the freezing temperature, dancing alone and speaking to someone who wasn't there. Has she been examined by a physician? I inquired. By 3 of London's finest. They find no physical cause. One suggested a psychiatric hospital, but I cannot bear the thought. Her voice faltered. There is something else that convinced me this is not merely medical. From her handbag she withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. Unfolding it revealed a curious medallion with symbols I did not recognize. At its center gleamed a stone that shifted between deep blue and violet. This was clutched in Sophia's hand when we found her. It is not hers. When I attempted to take it, my daughter became hysterical, claiming it was her invitation to the Shimmering Waltz. Holmes examined it with intense concentration before returning it. Most intriguing. Were there any other guests who exhibited similar symptoms afterward? None that I am aware of. And the guest list. Exclusive but substantial. Perhaps 200 of society's most prominent families. Holmes rose. Lady Montgomery, I shall need a complete list of attendees, particularly those who interacted with your daughter, along with access to her correspondence and personal effects. Whatever you require, Mr. Holmes, we are at our London residence on Belgrave Square. Has your husband's diplomatic work introduced any unusual acquaintances to your household recently? Holmes asked suddenly. A flicker of surprise crossed her features. There have been numerous visitors from abroad. How did you know? A reasonable inference given Lord Montgomery's position. After she departed, Holmes remained silent for several minutes, his eyes closed in contemplation. Finally, he sprang to his feet. Watson, prepare yourself. We shall attend the opera tonight. The opera? What bearing could that have on Lady Montgomery's situation? Holmes retrieved his pipe, his eyes glinting with excitement. The Duchess of Marlborough will be in attendance, along with several other guests from the Winterbourne Ball. Before we examine Sophia Montgomery's case directly, I wish to gather certain impressions without drawing attention to our investigation. You already have a theory? Several, though it would be premature to favor any particular explanation. He lit his pipe. But I will say this, there is a pattern suggesting forces more calculated than supernatural, despite the theatrical elements at play. As I watched him disappear behind tobacco smoke, I felt that familiar thrill of a new adventure. Something told me that the mystery of Sophia Montgomery and her Shimmering Waltz would prove to be one of the most unusual cases yet to test his remarkable faculties. Chapter 2. Notes at the Opera. That evening found us settled in a private box at the Royal Opera House, the grand chandeliers casting their golden glow over London's elite. Holmes sat unnaturally still, his hawkish profile silhouetted against the crimson drapes as his eyes methodically scanned the attendees below. There, he murmured, indicating with a subtle nod, the Duchess of Marlborough, in the center box opposite us, draped in emeralds. To her left, Lord and Lady Whitcomb. Their daughter was Sophia Montgomery's school companion at Rodine, and, observe the gentleman now entering the box adjacent to theirs. Following his gaze, I saw a distinguished man of perhaps 50, immaculately attired, with a silver-streaked beard and penetrating eyes. Baron von Hertzfeld, Holmes whispered, Austria's cultural attaché and an accomplished pianist. Note how the Duchess brightens at his arrival. You suspect him of involvement in our case? I suspect nothing yet, but find everything worthy of observation. The Baron moves in both diplomatic and artistic circles, precisely the intersection where our mysterious malady first appeared. As the orchestra began tuning their instruments, Holmes discreetly produced his opera glasses. "Watson, do you see the young woman 3 rows from the front? Pale blue gown, pearl choker, blonde hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure?" "Yes, what of her? That is Miss Eliza Carrington, who was also present at the Winterbourne ball. According to Mycroft, who keeps track of such trivial social matters, she has been declining invitations ever since, citing an unexplained illness." The opera commenced, but Holmes paid it scant attention, his focus remaining on the audience rather than the stage. During the intermission, he abruptly rose. "Wait here," he instructed. "I shall make a brief circuit of the foyer." He returned. 20 minutes later, a satisfied glint in his eye and a program in his hand, bearing what appeared to be a fresh signature. "Most illuminating," he remarked, though he offered no elaboration. The following morning, Holmes was already dressed and pacing when I came down to breakfast. 3 newspapers lay discarded beside his untouched plate. "We have an appointment at E. Belgrave Square in 1 hour," he announced. "I've received Lady Montgomery's guest list and made some preliminary inquiries. There were precisely 217 attendees at the Winterbourne ball, including servants and musicians. Of those, 11 have subsequently withdrawn from society with various complaints. Curious, wouldn't you say?" At the Montgomery residence, a stately townhouse with imposing white columns, we were greeted by a severe-looking butler who led us to a magnificent drawing room where Lady Adelaide awaited us. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming. My husband is currently meeting with the Foreign Secretary and sends his regrets." "No matter," Holmes replied. "It is your daughter we have come to see." Lady Adelaide's composure faltered. "Sophia had a difficult night. She attempted to leave the house again. We've had to secure her bedroom door. I should like to examine her now, if I may." She led us upstairs to a spacious bedroom where heavy curtains blocked most of the daylight. Sophia Montgomery sat motionless by the window, her slender figure silhouetted against the dim glow filtering through the brocade. She was a striking young woman with her mother's aristocratic features, though her eyes held a vacant, distant expression. "Sophia," Lady Adelaide spoke gently, "these gentlemen are here to help you." The girl gave no indication she had heard, continuing to stare out at the square below while her fingers traced repetitive patterns on the glass. Holmes approached slowly. "Miss Montgomery, I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. May we speak with you about the Winterbourne ball?" At the mention of the ball, Sophia turned to face us, a sudden alertness animating her features. "Have you come with my invitation?" she asked, her voice unexpectedly clear. "I've been waiting. The next dance approaches." Holmes glanced at the medallion hanging from a ribbon around her neck, the same one Lady Montgomery had shown us. "Is that your invitation there? This?" She clutched it protectively. "This is merely the key. The true invitation will come when the stars align." Her gaze drifted past us. "The music is mathematics, you know. Perfect sequences that reveal the pattern." Exchanged a concerned look with Holmes, who appeared fascinated rather than disturbed by these ramblings. "What pattern, Miss Montgomery?" he inquired gently. "The pattern of light and sound." Her fingers resumed their movement on the window glass, tracing what I now recognized as a waltz rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. When you see it properly, the veil drops away. "And who showed you this pattern?" A secretive smile crossed her lips. "The conductor, of course. He selects only those who can truly hear." Holmes nodded as though this made perfect sense. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand toward the medallion. Sophia recoiled instantly, clutching the object. "No, it's mine. I earned it." "Of course," Holmes soothed. "I merely wish to admire it. The craftsmanship appears exceptional." She relaxed slightly. "It is. Each one is unique, calibrated to its owner." "There are others, then?" Her expression grew guarded. "I shouldn't say more. The dance is private." She turned back to the window, once again lost in her mysterious contemplation. "You should go now. I must prepare." Outside Sophia's room, Lady Adelaide wrung her hands in distress. "You see how it is, Mr. Holmes. These cryptic statements, this fixation. It's as though she's been enchanted." "Has she received any correspondence?" "Since the ball, letters, telegrams, packages. Nothing unusual, though she has been writing extensively herself." Lady Adelaide led us to a writing desk in the corner of Sophia's sitting room. Pages and pages of this. Holmes examined the sheets covered in Sophia's elegant handwriting. Not words, but musical notation interspersed with mathematical formulas and geometric patterns. "May I borrow these?" Holmes asked, carefully gathering the papers. "I promise. They shall be returned." As we departed, Holmes requested to inspect the garden pavilion where Sophia had been found. It was a small Grecian-style structure, its marble columns supporting a domed roof adorned with astronomical motifs. Holmes circled it slowly, examining the ground. "Interesting," he murmured, crouching to study something invisible to my eye. "Most interesting." "What have you found?" Instead of answering, he asked Lady Adelaide, "Does your household employ a gardener named Thomas Wilson?" She appeared startled. "Yes, though he's only been with us since October. How could you possibly know that?" "A simple deduction based on these footprints and this." He held up what looked like a broken shirt button. "A man's button, caught in the hinge of the pavilion door, bearing traces of the particular soil mixture found only in Montgomery Gardens greenhouse. Later, in our hansom cab returning to Baker Street, I finally demanded explanation. Holmes, how could you possibly know the gardener's name? My friend smiled enigmatically. I didn't, until Lady Montgomery confirmed it, but I observed a pattern of footprints around the pavilion made by a man's work boots, size 11, with a distinctive repair to the left sole. The same distinctive print appears in the Police Gazette's description of a suspect in a series of thefts from aristocratic homes, one Thomas Wilson, whose real name is believed to be Heinrich Meller, formerly employed by the Austro-Hungarian Diplomatic Corps. Holmes tapped the papers from Sophia's desk. The plot thickens, Watson. We are dealing with something far more complex than a young woman's delusion. You suspect this gardener of involvement in her condition? I suspect he is but one player in an elaborate game. Holmes stared thoughtfully at the passing London. You streets. Tonight, Watson, we attend another social gathering, a musical soirée at Baron von Hertzfeld's residence. I believe we may find more pieces to our puzzle there. Chapter 3. A Musical Soirée. I must warn you, Watson, Holmes remarked as our cab approached the impressive Belgravia townhouse that evening. We are entering a gathering of considerable significance. The Baron's musical soirées are known for attracting an eclectic assembly of diplomats, musicians, and scientists, all under the guise of artistic appreciation. Scientists at a musical event? I inquired, adjusting my white tie. Indeed, von Hertzfeld has a particular interest in the mathematics of music. He has published several monographs on harmonic theory and its relation to physics. Holmes lowered his voice as we approached the entrance. We attend as guests of my brother Mycroft, who sends his regrets but whose name opens doors even he cannot be bothered to enter. The Baron's residence was ablaze with light, its marble entrance hall crowded with London's elite. A string quartet played in one corner, though the music was nearly drowned by the animated conversations of the guests. Holmes navigated the crowd with practiced ease, nodding occasionally to acquaintances while his eyes continuously scanned the room. Ah, he murmured suddenly. The gentleman by the grand piano, Dr. Nikolai Zhirov, Russian mathematician and composer. Beside him, Professor James Morley of Cambridge, an authority on acoustical engineering. And there, speaking with the Countess of Wessex, is Dr. Elizabeth Chambers, whose work on vibration patterns in crystalline structures has caused quite a stir in scientific circles. You suspect this is more than a social gathering. I suspect nothing and everything, Watson. But observe, nearly half the guests at the Winterbourne ball who subsequently fell ill are present tonight, though all appear to have recovered. Before I could respond, we were approached by our host. Baron von Hertzfeld was even more imposing up close, tall and aristocratic, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they beheld. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his English carrying only the slightest trace of an accent. "What an unexpected pleasure. Your reputation precedes you." Holmes smiled affably. "As does yours, Baron. Your contributions to both diplomacy and musical theory are most impressive. You flatter me. I did not realize you had an interest in music beyond your own violin playing. I find the mathematical precision of Bach particularly stimulating to the intellect. In fact, I've been exploring the relationship between musical patterns and cognitive response, purely as an amateur, of course." Something flickered in the Baron's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or caution. A fascinating field of study. You must speak with Dr. Chambers, then. Her experiments with sound frequencies are quite transformative. I should like that very much. Enjoy the evening, gentlemen. There will be a special performance at 11. With a slight bow, the Baron moved on to greet other guests. Holmes immediately steered us toward Dr. Chambers, a striking woman of about 40 with intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority. "Dr. Chambers," Holmes began after introductions were complete, "I understand your work involves the effects of specific vibrational patterns on crystalline structures." She regarded him with sudden interest. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes, though I'm surprised. A detective would be familiar with such specialized research. The boundaries between sciences are more permeable than most realize. I understand you've discovered certain frequency combinations that can fundamentally alter molecular arrangements." "In specific materials, yes," she replied cautiously. "Under controlled conditions, we can induce temporary changes in perceptual processing through harmonic resonance." "Temporary changes," Holmes repeated thoughtfully. "In crystal or in human perception?" A guarded expression crossed her face. "Both, theoretically, but I fear I'm monopolizing your time at what should be a delightful social occasion." She glanced meaningfully at the Baron, who was observing our conversation from across the room. "Do enjoy the special performance later. It promises to be most enlightening." As she departed, I whispered, "Holmes, what was that about? You seemed to be speaking in some sort of code." "Not code, Watson, simply navigating the boundaries of what can be openly discussed." He deftly plucked 2 champagne flutes from a passing waiter's tray, handing one to me while pretending to sip from his own. "We are in the presence of a remarkable experiment, though whether scientific or criminal remains to be determined." We spent the next hour circulating among the guests. Holmes managed brief conversations with several of the recovered patients from the Winterbourne ball, though none seemed aware of their connection to each other. At precisely 11, a hush fell over the gathering as Baron von Hertzfeld approached, the magnificent grand piano. "Distinguished friends," he announced, "it is my privilege to present a truly unique musical experience. What you are about to hear is an original composition that explores the mathematical relationship between sound and consciousness. The Shimmering Waltz." I felt Holmes stiffen beside me. The lights dimmed slightly as the Baron seated himself at the piano. He was joined by a violinist and a cellist, and as they began to play, I experienced a curious sensation. The melody was hauntingly beautiful but somehow disorienting. Notes arranged in sequences that seemed to resist conventional harmony while creating something more complex. Holmes gripped my arm. "Watson," he whispered urgently, "focus on me. Count backward from 100. Confused but trusting his judgment, I began the mental exercise. As I did, I noticed several guests around us swaying slightly, their eyes taking on the same vacant expression I had observed in Sophia Montgomery. The music built to a crescendo, at which point the overhead chandelier began casting peculiar patterns of refracted light. The combination of sound and illumination created a subtle kaleidoscopic effect that I found myself struggling not to follow. Suddenly, Holmes pulled me toward the exit. "We must leave now," he hissed, "but carefully. We must not draw attention." Once, outside in the cool night air, Holmes pulled me quickly down the street before hailing a cab. "What just happened, Holmes?" I demanded once we were safely moving toward Baker Street. "A demonstration, Watson, one that confirms my suspicions." His expression was grave. "We have witnessed an attempt to induce a specific altered state through a combination of auditory and visual stimuli, a state that leaves the mind temporarily susceptible to suggestion or programming. Like hypnosis. Similar, but far more sophisticated. This technique appears to target specific individuals who possess a particular sensitivity, likely those with synesthetic tendencies. Synesthesia, the neurological condition where stimulation of one sensory pathway leads to automatic experiences in another. Precisely. Those who naturally experience sound as color or mathematics as spatial patterns would be especially vulnerable. Holmes tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the cab window. What we don't yet know is the purpose behind these manipulations. Could it be some sort of psychological experiment? Perhaps. Or something far more sinister. Holmes fell silent for a moment. "I need to examine those papers from Sophia Montgomery's desk more carefully. And tomorrow, we must pay a visit to Miss Eliza Carrington, another affected victim who, unlike Sophia, appears to have recovered." When we returned to Baker Street, Holmes immediately spread Sophia's papers across our sitting room floor, studying the complex notations and diagrams with intense concentration. "Fascinating," he muttered after nearly an hour. "She's unconsciously recorded the mathematical structure of the music that affected her. These are not random scribblings but precise transcriptions of auditory patterns translated into visual and numerical form. Can you decipher them?" Holmes looked up, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of intellectual challenge. "Not entirely, yet, but I'm beginning to see the pattern, and I believe Baron von Hertzfeld's special performance tonight was merely a diluted version of what occurred at the Winterbourne Ball. For what purpose? That, my dear Watson, is what we must discover before the next movement in this orchestrated mystery begins." Chapter 4. The Recovered Patient. The following morning brought a telegram from Lady Montgomery reporting that Sophia had attempted to escape during the night, speaking of the music calling her. Holmes absorbed this news with a grave nod before retrieving his hat and coat. "Come, Watson. Miss Eliza Carrington awaits us in Kensington. I sent a wire at dawn requesting an interview." During our cab ride, Holmes remained unusually quiet, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in that characteristic pose of deep contemplation. "I've been analyzing the musical composition from last night," he finally said as we turned onto a tree-lined avenue of imposing townhouses. "It employs what musicians call enharmonic modulation, notes that sound identical but have different harmonic functions. When combined with specific visual stimuli, the effect on certain minds appears quite profound." "But not on yours," I observed. A thin smile crossed his lips. "I recognized the technique early enough to employ countermeasures. The mathematics behind it are actually quite elegant, a fact which makes our adversary all the more dangerous." The Carrington residence stood slightly apart from its neighbors, its red brick facade adorned with elaborate white stonework. We were admitted by a butler who led us to a bright morning room where a young woman sat arranging flowers. Eliza Carrington was perhaps 23, with delicate features and a complexion that, while still pale, suggested recent recovery from illness. She greeted us with composed curiosity. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, this is an unexpected honor, though I cannot imagine how I might assist in any investigation." "Miss Carrington," Holmes began, declining the offered seat, "I understand you were present at the Duchess of Marlborough's Winterbourne ball 3 weeks ago." Her hands froze momentarily among the lilies. "Yes, I was. A lovely affair." "And afterward, you were indisposed for some time. A trifling illness, nothing more." Holmes fixed her with his penetrating gaze. "Miss Carrington, I am investigating a matter of some delicacy involving other attendees of that ball who experienced similar indispositions. Your insights could prove invaluable." She hesitated, glancing toward the door before lowering her voice. "My parents believe I suffered a nervous exhaustion. The truth is somewhat more disturbing, Mr. Holmes. I experienced something that night I cannot fully explain, something that left me, not myself, for nearly 2 weeks." "Please elaborate," Holmes encouraged gently. "During the ball, I was approached by Baron von Hertzfeld, who invited several of us to witness what he called a revolutionary musical experiment in the Duchess's private music room. There were perhaps 15 guests selected, all young people with some musical background." She twisted her hands anxiously. "The Baron played a waltz of his own composition, while strange lights were projected onto a crystal installation. The effect was disorienting at first, then utterly captivating." "And afterward?" Holmes prompted. "I remember very little of the remainder of the evening. The next morning, I awoke with a peculiar medallion beside my pillow and an overwhelming compulsion to follow certain musical patterns that seemed to be playing constantly in my mind. For days, I could focus on nothing else. I was drawn to my piano at all hours, attempting to recreate the melody." Holmes nodded encouragingly. "Yet you appear to have recovered." "Yes. After about 10 days, I received a letter containing a musical score, just a few bars. When I played it, the compulsion simply faded, like awakening from a dream." She hesitated. "Mr. Holmes, I destroyed that letter immediately. Something about the experience frightened me deeply." "Do you still possess the medallion?" "No." Her gaze dropped to her hands. "A man came to collect it, said he was sent by the Baron to retrieve property mistakenly given." "Can you describe this man?" "Tall, German accent, with a distinctive scar along his jawline. He knew details about my experience that I had told no one." Holmes and I exchanged glances. "Miss Carrington," I ventured, "did you experience any unusual dreams during your indisposition?" Her eyes widened. "Yes. How did you know?" "I dreamed of a vast ballroom filled with elaborately masked dancers, all moving in perfect synchronization to that same waltz. In the center stood a conductor, his face concealed, directing not just the music, but the movements of everyone present." She shuddered. "The strangest part was that, in the dream, I understood the dance was actually a complex calculation being performed through movement, as though we were components in some grand mathematical equation." Holmes leaned forward intently. "Were you aware of other participants in this calculation?" "Vaguely. I sensed others like myself, separate yet connected through the music. Each of us seemed to be working on different aspects of some larger problem." "One final question," Holmes said. "Did the Baron or anyone else ask you about your family's connection to the Admiralty?" Miss Carrington paled visibly. "How could you possibly know? My uncle is First Sea Lord, though it's not widely discussed in social circles." "A reasonable inference," Holmes replied smoothly. "Thank you for your candor, Miss Carrington. You've been most helpful." Outside, I could barely contain my questions. "Holmes, what was that about the Admiralty?" "A test of my theory," he replied, scanning the street before hailing a cab. "Every affected person I've identified has a connection. to sensitive diplomatic, military, or scientific information. Sophia Montgomery's father is a diplomatic envoy. Miss Carrington's uncle oversees naval operations. Another victim is the son of a cryptographer at the Foreign Office. You believe this is some form of espionage? A most sophisticated form, extracting information from unwitting sources who would never realize they had been compromised. Holmes checked his watch. We must make haste to Scotland Yard. I wired Inspector Lestrade this morning regarding our gardener friend, Thomas Wilson. At Scotland Yard, Lestrade greeted us with characteristic briskness. Mr. Holmes, I've got the information you requested. Thomas Wilson, or Heinrich Müller, as he was previously known, was indeed employed by the Austro-Hungarian embassy until last year. Minor diplomatic role officially, though our intelligence suggests connections to their less public operations. And his current whereabouts? Vanished, Mr. Holmes. Left the Montgomery household yesterday afternoon without notice. His lodgings in Southwark were cleared out. Landlady says a gentleman with a foreign accent paid his outstanding rent in full. Holmes nodded as though this confirmed his expectations. Inspector, I need you to place a discreet watch on Baron Klaus von Hertzfeld's residence. No intervention yet, merely observation of all visitors. Von Hertzfeld, the Austrian cultural attaché? On what grounds? Let us merely say there are indications of activities beyond his diplomatic mandate. Our way back to Baker Street, Holmes directed our cab to make a detour to the British Museum. He disappeared inside for 20 minutes, returning with a thoughtful expression. As I suspected, he remarked as we resumed our journey. The symbology on Sophia Montgomery's medallion combines elements of ancient astronomical notation with more modern mathematical principles. It appears to be a key of sorts, not just figuratively as she claimed, but literally a cipher key. For decoding what? That, Watson, is the question that brings together all threads of this peculiar case. Tonight, we shall follow a different, sort of musical score, one that I believe will lead us to the heart of this mystery. As evening approached, Holmes spent hours at his chemical table, analyzing minute scrapings he had somehow obtained from the Carrington residence. Later, he bent over Sophia's papers, transcribing portions into a fresh notebook while occasionally playing discordant sequences on his violin. Watson, he announced abruptly as the clock struck 8, I need you to send 2 telegrams immediately. The first to Lady Montgomery, instructing her to double the watch on Sophia and admit no visitors under any circumstances. The second to my brother Mycroft with this precise wording, Winterbourne Waltz identified. Suspected targets include Admiralty Cipher Officer, Gibraltar Defense Plans, and Austrian Succession Protocols. Diplomatic incident imminent. Holmes, what have you discovered? He carefully folded his notebook into his pocket. The waltz, Watson, is more than music. It's a sophisticated method of extracting and encoding information, leveraging the unique capabilities of synesthetic minds. And tonight, I believe the final movement is to be performed. Chapter 5. The midnight crescendo as darkness settled over London. Holmes donned a nondescript coat and flat cap that transformed him from distinguished detective to common laborer. He instructed me to wear my most worn clothing and to bring my service revolver. Conceal it well, Watson, he cautioned. Tonight we venture into a realm where diplomatic immunity may shield our adversaries from the usual legal constraints. Where are we going? I asked as we slipped out through the back entrance to avoid Mrs. Hudson's notice. To the East End, then onward to a most unexpected concert hall. His voice was low and tense. According to my investigations, tonight marks what they call the final integration, when all the separate calculations performed by the affected minds are to be combined. Rather than hailing a cab, Holmes led us through a confusing labyrinth of side streets and alleyways. Despite my years in London, I soon lost all sense of direction as we passed from affluent neighborhoods to progressively poor districts. We, "Are being followed," Holmes whispered without turning his head. "Have been since Baker Street, a testament to how seriously our opponents take our interference. Should we confront them?" "Quite the contrary. Their surveillance works to our advantage, provided they believe we remain unaware." After nearly an hour of this circuitous journey, Holmes abruptly pulled me into a darkened doorway. Seconds later, two men hurried past our hiding place, their faces obscured by turned-up collars. "As I suspected," Holmes murmured. "Now, we follow them." The men led us to the river, where they boarded a small steam launch that waited by a dilapidated pier. Holmes pulled me behind a stack of crates as the boat departed. "Patience, Watson," he counseled, checking his pocket watch by the dim light of a distant lamp. "Their departure confirms my theory about tonight's destination." 20 minutes later, a second launch approached the pier. Holmes pulled his cap lower and adopted a slouching gait as we emerged from our hiding place. "Evening, gents," called the boatman. "You're the last ones. Best get aboard. Tide's turning." Holmes grunted an unintelligible response as we boarded. 3 other men were already seated, rough-looking fellows who barely acknowledged our arrival. The Maestihux launch navigated the dark Thames with surprising speed. As we passed the great ships moored near the docks, I realized we were heading downriver toward the estuary. After about 30 minutes, I detected a faint glow on the horizon, seemingly emanating from the water itself. "The old observatory," Holmes whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Built on a private island by an eccentric astronomer in the previous century, now allegedly abandoned." As we drew closer, the glow resolved into lights from a domed structure silhouetted against the night sky. The launch docked at a small jetty where several similar vessels were already moored. Our fellow passengers disembarked without a word, heading toward the illuminated building. "Follow me closely," Holmes instructed. "We must blend in until we ascertain the full scope of this gathering." We joined a stream of attendees entering the observatory, an eclectic mix that included laborers like ourselves, distinguished gentlemen in evening attire, and several women wearing elaborate masks. No one requested invitations or identification. The interior of the observatory had been transformed. The central chamber, dominated by a massive telescope mounted beneath a retractable dome, now contained an array of scientific equipment surrounding a raised platform. Crystal prisms hung from the ceiling, positioned to catch and refract light from strategically placed electric lamps. "Ingenious," Holmes muttered. "The dome's acoustic properties combined with the optical arrangement, this is no mere performance venue but a precisely calibrated instrument." People continued to arrive until perhaps 100 had gathered. I noticed that about 20 individuals, mostly young women and men from society families, were being guided to specific positions around the chamber by attendants wearing silver medallions similar to Sophia Montgomery's. "The calculators," Holmes whispered, "each one positioned according to their particular synesthetic talents." His eyes narrowed suddenly. "And look there, the third young lady from the left." I followed his gaze and felt a jolt of recognition. Sophia Montgomery. But how? Lady Montgomery was instructed. Evidently, our adversaries have resources within the Montgomery household. Note her medallion, larger than the others and set with a central stone. What does that signify? She is what they call the conductor's key, the primary focal point through which all calculations will be channeled. Before Holmes could elaborate, further, Baron von Hertzfeld entered, accompanied by Dr. Chambers and Professor Morley. The audience fell silent as the Baron took his position on the platform. "Distinguished colleagues," he began, his voice resonating perfectly in the domed space, "tonight marks the culmination of decades of research into the harmonic mathematics of consciousness. What you are about to witness represents a breakthrough in information processing that will transform the future of international relations." A murmur passed through the crowd. The Baron continued. "For too long, critical information has remained locked in disparate locations, protected by artificial barriers of nationality and allegiance. Tonight, we demonstrate how these barriers can be transcended through the universal languages of music and mathematics. Dr. Chambers stepped forward. The individuals you see positioned around the chamber have each been calibrated to process specific categories of information to which they have unconscious access through family or social connections. Their synesthetic abilities allow them to perform complex calculations without conscious awareness, translating sensitive information into mathematical patterns. And now, the Baron announced, we shall conduct the final integration, producing a complete cipher key that will grant access to diplomatic and military communications across Europe. Holmes tensed beside me. With subtle movements, he began inching us toward the rear of the crowd, closer to where Sophia stood in her trance-like state. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Baron declared, "I present the Shimmering Waltz in its complete form." As musicians took their positions, Holmes whispered urgently, "When the music begins, we have approximately 45 seconds before the full hypnotic pattern establishes. You must reach Sophia and remove her medallion while I create a diversion. But the guards will be momentarily disoriented when I trigger this." He discreetly showed me a small glass vial, a compound that, when exposed to heat, produces a harmless but disorienting vapor. The essential thing is removing Sophia. Without her serving as the focal point, their calculation cannot be completed. The first notes of the waltz began, hauntingly, beautiful yet subtly wrong in ways that made my skin prickle. The crystal prisms above began to rotate, casting shimmering patterns of light throughout the chamber. Around us, people swayed slightly, their eyes growing unfocused. Holmes gave me a sharp nod and moved swiftly toward one of the electric lamps. I pushed through the increasingly unresponsive crowd toward Sophia, who had begun to sway in rhythm with the music, her hands tracing complex patterns in the air before her. I was within 3 paces of her when a sudden commotion erupted across the chamber. Holmes had dropped his vial onto the lamp, creating an instantaneous plume of bluish vapor. Coughing and confusion spread rapidly. Taking advantage of the disruption, I lunged forward and grasped the medallion hanging from Sophia's neck, yanking it free. Her eyes widened in shock as awareness seemed to flood back into them. "Dr. Watson?" she gasped. "Where am I? What's happening?" No time to explain, I grasped her arm. "We must leave immediately." Across the chamber, I glimpsed Holmes grappling with one of the Baron's guards. The music had stopped, replaced by shouts and the sounds of struggle. More guards were pushing through the disoriented crowd toward us. "This way." I pulled Sophia toward a side exit I had noted earlier. As we reached it, Holmes appeared beside us, slightly disheveled but triumphant. "Excellent work, Watson. Quickly now. Reinforcements are coming." The 3 of us burst through the door into the cool night air, the sounds of pursuit close behind. The question of escape loomed large as we faced the dark waters surrounding the island. "The launch that brought the musicians," Holmes declared, pointing toward a small pier different from where we had arrived. "It's our only chance." Chapter 6. Pursuit on the Thames. We raced across the moonlit grounds toward the secondary pier, Sophia stumbling between us in her evening slippers. Behind us, shouts and the glow of lanterns indicated our pursuers were organizing a systematic search. "They're sealing all exit points," Holmes muttered, pulling us into the shadow of a stone outbuilding as guards ran past. "The launch is our only hope of escape." Sophia clutched at my arm, her eyes wide with confusion. "Dr. Watson, please, what is happening? The last thing I clearly remember is the Winterbourne Ball, then fragments, dreams of dancing and calculations." "Later, Miss Montgomery," Holmes whispered. "Your mind is still clearing from their influence. For now, we must focus on getting you to safety." He peered around the corner. The way appears momentarily clear. Now, we dashed toward the small pier where a steam launch was moored, its boiler still hot. The vessel was smaller than the one that had brought us, but its compact size might prove advantageous for navigating the river at night. Holmes leapt aboard with surprising agility, helping Sophia over the gunwale before I joined them. He immediately set to work on the engine while I cast off the mooring lines. "Can you operate this craft?" I asked as the engine sputtered to life. "A simple enough mechanism," he replied with characteristic confidence, "similar to one I piloted during the Friesland smuggling case. The tide is with us, which should provide additional speed." As the launch pulled away from the pier, a shout came from the shore. Two figures ran toward us, one raising what appeared to be a pistol. "Down!" I pushed Sophia to the deck as a shot rang out, splintering the wooden railing inches from where Holmes stood. Holmes steered us into the darkness of the main channel, cutting the running lights to make us a more difficult target. The sound of another launch starting up behind us confirmed our escape had been detected. "They'll be after us within minutes," Holmes said grimly. "We have perhaps a quarter-hour advantage, no more." As we sped downriver, Sophia began to tremble. Violently, I wrapped my coat around her shoulders, noting with concern that her respiration was rapid and shallow. "She's experiencing withdrawal from their conditioning," Holmes observed. "The compulsions and patterns they implanted are dissipating, which can cause temporary physical distress." "Will she be all right?" "Physically, yes. The others recovered naturally over time. Our abrupt intervention may accelerate the process, though not without discomfort." Sophia's trembling gradually subsided as we continued our escape. The lights of London grew distant behind us as Holmes navigated through the wider stretches of the estuary, guided by his seemingly infallible mental map of the Thames. "Where are we going?" I asked, keeping my voice low as though our pursuers might hear over the engine's steady churn. "To rendezvous with Mycroft's people. My telegram set certain contingencies in motion." Holmes checked his pocket watch. "We must reach Gravesend by 1:15. Sophia, now more composed, drew herself up with remarkable dignity considering the circumstances. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I understand I owe you my freedom, though I still comprehend little of what has happened. Was I being used in some way?" Holmes nodded gravely. "You and several others with similar neurological gifts. Your particular form of synesthesia, the ability to perceive music as mathematical patterns, made you especially valuable to their operation. But for what purpose? To extract and process classified information accessible through your family connections. Your father's diplomatic work gave you unconscious exposure to encryption methodologies used by the Foreign Office. Under the influence of the Baron's musical programming, your mind was translating these into formats usable by foreign agents." Sophia paled. "Then I have betrayed my country without even knowing it." "Not betrayed," Holmes corrected gently. "You were exploited through means no ordinary person could have resisted. And, thanks to our intervention tonight, their complete cipher key remains incomplete." The distant sound of another engine caused us all to stiffen. "They've found our trail," Holmes murmured, adjusting our course toward the southern bank. "They'll have faster vessels and likely know these waters better than I." He steered us into a narrow tributary partially concealed by overhanging trees. For several tense minutes we drifted with minimal power, listening as the pursuing launch passed our hiding place. "They'll realize their error soon enough," Holmes said, easing us back into the main channel once the sound had faded. "We must make the most of this temporary advantage." As we resumed our journey, Sophia suddenly clutched her head. "It's still there," she whispered. "The music, fainter now, but calling me, like a pattern needing completion." Holmes studied her intently. The medallion was only part of their method. The music itself contains embedded commands, a kind of oral programming that operates on multiple levels. "How do we stop it?" I asked, alarmed by her evident distress. "We must overwrite it." Holmes reached into his pocket and produced a small silver whistle. This emits a precise counter-frequency that should disrupt the established pattern. Miss Sewon. Montgomery, please permit me. He blew the whistle. Though I heard nothing, Sophia's reaction was immediate. She gasped, her eyes widening as though seeing something remarkable. The patterns, they're dissolving, she murmured, like ice melting in warm water. Holmes nodded with satisfaction. A technique developed by certain Tibetan monastics, adapted for our specific needs. He tucked the whistle away. That should provide temporary relief, though full recovery may take time. The distant lights of Gravesend appeared on the horizon, and Holmes adjusted our course again. We'll need to abandon this vessel soon. The Baron's influence extends throughout diplomatic circles. We require assistance outside conventional channels. As we approached the docks, I noticed a solitary figure waiting on an otherwise deserted pier, smoking a pipe whose ember glowed in the darkness. Holmes flashed our running lights in a particular sequence, receiving a lantern signal in return. Mycroft's man, he confirmed, will transfer to their transportation immediately. We docked beside the dimly lit pier. The waiting figure, a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face, helped Sophia ashore without a word. The others are waiting, he said simply to Holmes. We have reports of diplomatic communications being drafted between Whitehall and the Austrian embassy. Your brother suggests time is of the essence. Indeed, Holmes agreed. And what of the Montgomery household? Secured. Lady Montgomery is under discreet protection, though she believes it to be routine security due to her husband's position. As we followed our taciturn guide to a waiting carriage, Holmes became aware of my questioning gaze. All will be explained, Watson, but not here. We are entering a realm where diplomatic intrigue and scientific exploitation intersect, a dangerous combination. The carriage took us not toward London as I had expected, but further inland along country roads. Sophia had fallen into an exhausted sleep, the ordeal of her liberation taking its toll. Where are we going? I whispered to Holmes. To one of Mycroft's unofficial residences, a place where certain sensitive matters can be addressed outside conventional protocols. His expression was grave in the dim carriage light. What we uncovered tonight goes beyond ordinary criminal enterprise, Watson. It represents a new frontier in intelligence gathering, one that exploits not technology, but the unique capabilities of the human mind itself. And Baron von Hertzfeld, a brilliant man pursuing brilliant means toward deplorable ends. Holmes gazed out at the passing darkness. By morning, the diplomatic machinery will be in motion. Our task now is to ensure Miss Montgomery's complete recovery and protection. She remains key to understanding exactly what information may have been compromised. As dawn broke on the horizon, I couldn't help but feel that we had only glimpsed the opening movements of a much larger composition, one whose final notes remained troublingly unresolved. Chapter 7. The Safe House. The unofficial residence proved to be a handsome Tudor manor nestled among ancient oaks, its location so discreet that even I, who prided myself on my knowledge of the counties surrounding London, could not precisely place it on any mental map. We arrived as the first golden light of dawn illuminated its mullioned windows. Thornfield Grange, our guide announced as he helped the still drowsy Sophia from the carriage, one of the government's more comfortable secrets. The heavy oak door swung open before we reached it, revealing a severe-looking woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. Miss Harrington, Holmes greeted her. I see Mycroft's telegram preceded us. Indeed, Mr. Holmes, rooms have been prepared and Dr. Winters is standing by. Her sharp eyes assessed Sophia. I presume this is our special guest. Miss Sophia Montgomery, Holmes confirmed, who requires both medical attention and debriefing, in that order. We were led through a grand entrance hall adorned with ancestral portraits and antique weapons into a well-appointed sitting room, where a fire already blazed in the hearth. A distinguished gentleman with a medical bag rose to greet us. Dr. Winters. Holmes said, "May I present Dr. Watson, whose medical opinion I value above all others. Perhaps you might consult together on Miss Montgomery's condition?" The doctor nodded courteously. "A pleasure, Dr. Watson. I've been briefed on the nature of Miss Montgomery's experience, though I confess such cases fall outside ordinary medical literature." While the doctors conferred, Holmes drew me aside. "Watson, I must meet with certain officials who will be arriving shortly. Would you stay with Miss Montgomery? She trusts you, and in her vulnerable state, that trust is our most valuable asset." I agreed readily, and soon found myself in a comfortable bedroom where Sophia had been settled. Dr. Winters had administered a mild sedative after a thorough examination, declaring her physically sound, but advising observation for her mental state. The mind, when subjected to such extraordinary manipulation, can react in unpredictable ways, he explained before departing. Watch particularly for perseveration, the repetition of patterns or movements that might indicate lingering effects of her conditioning. For several hours I maintained my vigil as Sophia slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring fragments of what sounded like mathematical formulae. Shortly after noon, she awoke fully, her eyes clearer than I had yet seen them. "Dr. Watson," she said softly, "it wasn't all a dream then?" "No, Miss Montgomery. You're safe now, but you've been through an extraordinary ordeal." She pushed herself to a sitting position, accepting the glass of water I offered. I remember more now, fragments assembling into a coherent picture. They used us, all of us, as living calculators, didn't they? Holmes believes so, yes. Your particular talents made you susceptible to their methods. A shadow crossed her face. I have always experienced music differently than others. Since childhood, melodies have appeared to me as geometric structures, beautiful patterns of light and form. My father called it my composer's gift. How cruel that something so personal could be weaponized. Can you recall what information they might have extracted from you? She closed her eyes in concentration. Diplomatic codes, encryption sequences I must have overheard or glimpsed in my father's study. I never consciously understood them, but they were there in my memory, waiting to be accessed. Her eyes opened with sudden alarm. There were others like me, each processing different categories of information. Together, we were creating something far more significant than any of us could produce individually. Before I could inquire further, the door opened to admit Holmes, accompanied by a heavy-set gentleman whose imperious bearing immediately suggested his identity. Mycroft Holmes, he introduced himself to Sophia without preamble. I represent certain interests within Her Majesty's government that are most concerned with your situation, Miss Montgomery. Where Sherlock was all angles and nervous energy, his brother exuded ponderous authority. His calculating gaze missed nothing as it swept over Sophia. "She is recovering well," he observed, not as a question, but as a declaration of fact. "The conditioning is dissipating, though not entirely gone." "Excellent. We require her testimony while the neural pathways remain accessible, but her autonomy is sufficiently restored." "Brother," Sherlock admonished, "Miss Montgomery is not merely an evidence repository, but a victim of sophisticated exploitation." "Of course," Mycroft conceded without genuine contrition. "Nevertheless, time is of critical importance." "The Barons. Diplomatic immunity complicates our response, and we must understand exactly what has been compromised." Sophia straightened her posture, a flash of her natural dignity returning. "I wish to help in any way possible, Mr. Holmes. My loyalty to England was never in question, only my ability to protect the information I was inadvertently exposed to." Over the next hour, Mycroft conducted a gentle but thorough interrogation, aided by Sherlock's occasional insights. Sophia described her experiences in remarkable detail. The initial sensations at the Winterbourne ball, the dreamlike state that followed, and the peculiar tasks her mind had performed while under influence. It was like solving an elaborate puzzle while dancing, she explained. Each movement, each note corresponded to specific information patterns. When placed in the correct sequence, these patterns yielded new configurations, translations of diplomatic communications into forms that could be easily decoded. "And the other participants?" Mycroft prompted. "Can you recall their specific contributions?" "Only vaguely. We were connected through the music but focused on different aspects. Eliza Carrington was processing naval deployment schedules, I believe. The Whitcomb boy, something about colonial administration in India." Mycroft and Sherlock exchanged significant glances. "A comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation," Mycroft observed, "targeting precisely the information needed to anticipate British responses to certain impending situations on the continent." The Baron's expertise in both music and mathematics made him the ideal architect for such a scheme, Sherlock added, but he required an implementation team, individuals with specific scientific knowledge. "Dr. Chambers," I suggested, "and Professor Morley. Indeed, each contributing specialized expertise in vibration patterns, acoustic engineering, and neurological." Response. Holmes paced the room with mounting energy. "The question remains, why release certain participants like Miss Carrington while maintaining control over others?" Sophia's expression suddenly sharpened. "The phases," she said. "I recall overhearing something about processing phases. Some of us were calibrated for initial calculation, others for verification, and a select few, myself included, for final integration." "Of course," Holmes exclaimed. "A sequential operation. Those whose tasks were completed were released with their memories partially obscured, while those required for later phases were kept under deeper influence." Mycroft checked his pocket, watch with deliberate precision. "The diplomatic situation grows more delicate by the hour. The Austrian embassy has formally protested what they term the abduction of Baron von Hertzfeld's musical protégé, claiming cultural exchange activities have been misinterpreted as something sinister. "Preposterous," I objected. "But predictable," Mycroft responded impassively. "International incidents are resolved through carefully constructed narratives, Doctor, not unvarnished truths. Our challenge is to neutralize the threat while avoiding diplomatic rupture." Holmes turned to his brother. "And what of the Baron's other calculators?" "Being located and extracted as we speak. Your disruption of the final integration has bought us time, but not resolution." Mycroft rose ponderously. "I must return to London. The Foreign Secretary requires briefing, and certain communications must be drafted with particular care." After Mycroft's departure, Holmes sat beside Sophia's bed, his expression uncharacteristically gentle. "Miss Montgomery, there is one more service you might render, though I hesitate to ask it of you after all you've endured." "Name it, Mr. Holmes. I wish to make amends, however unconscious my role." "The medallion you wore, the one Dr. Watson removed during your rescue. It contains specific harmonic patterns that, when properly analyzed, might allow us to develop countermeasures against this technique." She nodded solemnly. "You wish me to help decode it?" "Only if you feel capable. The risk of triggering residual conditioning is one I'm willing to accept," she finished firmly. "This gift of mine has been used against my country. Let me now use it in England's defense." Holmes smiled with genuine admiration. "Then we shall proceed, carefully, methodically, and with Dr. Watson monitoring your condition throughout." As night fell over Thornfield Grange, none of us could have anticipated how the Baron would respond to our interference, or what desperate measures he might employ to complete his symphony of secrets. Chapter 8. The Medallion's Secret. The library of Thornfield Grange proved an ideal setting for our delicate work. Ancient oak shelves laden with leather-bound volumes surrounded a massive table where Holmes had arranged his improvised laboratory. Microscopes, chemical apparatus, and musical instruments positioned with meticulous precision. Sophia sat nearby, pale but composed, as Holmes gently placed her medallion on a velvet cloth between them. In daylight, the object revealed intricate engravings I hadn't noticed during our chaotic escape, concentric circles of symbols interspersed with what appeared to be musical notation. Remarkable craftsmanship, Holmes observed, adjusting a magnifying lens over the medallion. The central stone is a rare form of quartz crystal with unusual refractive properties, similar to materials used in certain optical experiments at Enigma, Cambridge. It feels strange to see it as merely an object, Sophia admitted. For weeks it seemed an extension of myself, something precious beyond words. That was the conditioning, Holmes assured her. The Baron's method appears to create an artificial synesthetic bond between the subject and this focal device. For the next hour, Holmes conducted various tests, measuring the medallion's dimensions, analyzing its metal composition, and mapping the pattern of engravings. Sophia watched with growing interest, her natural scientific curiosity apparently reasserting itself. The outer ring contains astronomical notations, she observed, leaning closer. Similar to those on the ceiling of the observatory where you found me. Indeed, Holmes agreed. And the inner circles, what do you make of them? She studied the engravings, her fingers hovering just above the surface as though reluctant to make contact. Mathematical sequences embedded within musical notation. The intervals between notes correspond to specific numerical values. Can you interpret them? I believe so. She closed her eyes momentarily, her fingers now tracing patterns in the air as though following invisible threads. It's a transformation algorithm, a method for converting sensory input into mathematical operations. Holmes nodded encouragingly. And the central stone? A focal point. When light passes through it in specific patterns while the corresponding music plays. She faltered, pressing a hand to her temple. I'm sorry, there's a strange pressure. When I try to articulate this, residual conditioning, Holmes said with concern. Watson, perhaps we should continue tomorrow after Miss Montgomery has rested. No, Sophia insisted. I can manage. The resistance itself is informative. It reveals which aspects were most crucial to their system. With remarkable fortitude, she continued describing the medallion's function, how it served as both key and interpreter for the complex calculations performed by the entrained minds. Each component had been calibrated to her specific neurological profile, making it uniquely effective for her but less so for others. The true ingenuity lies in how it bridges conscious and unconscious processes, Holmes mused as he made notes, allowing extraction of information the subject doesn't realize they possess. Our session was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, bearing an urgent telegram for Holmes. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. What is it? I asked. Lestrade reports that Baron von Hertzfeld's residence has been completely vacated, staff dismissed, valuable equipment removed. More concerning, Dr. Elizabeth Chambers was found unconscious in her laboratory at Imperial College. She appears to have been subjected to the same technique used on the other victims, but with brutal intensity. Used on one of their own? I exclaimed, either to silence her or extract whatever information she possessed. Holmes folded the telegram deliberately. The Baron grows desperate, and therefore more dangerous. As evening approached, Mycroft returned, accompanied by a distinguished gentleman whom he introduced simply as Colonel Graves, without further explanation. Progress? Mycroft inquired, eyeing the medallion and Holmes's extensive notes. Significant. Holmes replied, Miss Montgomery has provided invaluable insights into the mechanism's function. With this understanding, we may be able to develop countermeasures against further applications of the technique. The colonel stepped forward, his military bearing unmistakable despite his civilian clothes. Most commendable, Miss Montgomery. Your service to the Crown will not go unrecognized. I seek no recognition, Colonel, Sophia replied with quiet dignity, only to undo whatever damage my compromised mind may have caused. As to that, Mycroft interjected, we've conducted assessments of potentially compromised information. The disruption of the final integration appears to have prevented the worst outcomes, but certain diplomatic encryption methods must now be considered vulnerable. Holmes frowned. Has the Baron been located? He crossed to Calais this morning, officially, recalled by his government for consultation following our diplomatic protest. Unofficially, we believe he's continuing to the Habsburg territories with his research, and his other victims. All located and under medical supervision, Mycroft confirmed. None as deeply entrained as Miss Montgomery. Most are already recovering. Their faculties. Colonel Graves cleared his throat meaningfully. The broader concern remains the technique itself. If perfected and deployed systematically, it represents an intelligence threat of unprecedented nature. Which is why our work here is crucial, Holmes asserted, gesturing to his notes. Understanding the method is the first step toward defending against it. Later that evening, after our distinguished visitors had departed, Holmes called me to the library where he was still working. Sophia had retired for the night, her strength taxed by the day's efforts. What do you make of this, Watson? He handed me a small notebook filled with musical notation interspersed with mathematical symbols, Sophia's transcription of the patterns contained within the medallion. I shook my head. It's beyond my comprehension, Holmes. Yet not beyond your observation. He tapped the page. Notice anything unusual about the structure? Studying it more carefully, I noted that certain sequences appeared to repeat with slight variations. There seems to be a pattern within the pattern, I ventured. Precisely, an embedded cipher, not just for extracting information, but for implanting commands. One of which, I believe, is still active within Miss Montgomery's mind. What kind of command? Holmes's expression was grave. A fail-safe. Insurance against exactly the kind of intervention we've executed. The Baron would never leave his prized. Conductor's key without protection. A cold apprehension seized me. You believe Sophia remains in danger? I believe she carries within her mind a final command sequence waiting for the proper trigger. Holmes gathered his papers urgently. We must modify our countermeasure approach immediately. He worked through the night, occasionally consulting Sophia's notes or playing brief sequences on a violin borrowed from the Manor's collection. I kept vigil, bringing him tea and maintaining a watchful silence as he immersed himself in this strange intersection of music, mathematics, and the human mind. Near dawn, Holmes straightened with sudden purpose. I believe I've isolated the trigger sequence and developed a neutralizing counter-melody. Now we must test it, but with the utmost caution. How? I asked, concerned for Sophia's already fragile state. We shall need her conscious participation, but in a controlled environment with medical support standing by. He rubbed his tired eyes. The Baron's work may have been corrupt in purpose, Watson, but its brilliance cannot be denied. He has written a symphony in the language of the human nervous system itself. As the first light of morning gilded the library windows, Holmes carefully packed his notes and the medallion into a secure case. Let us get some rest before we attempt this final movement. The confrontation between the Baron's composition and my counterpoint will require all our faculties and considerable courage from Miss Montgomery. What Holmes could not have known then was that the Baron had already set his contingency plan in motion, and that our safe house was considerably less secure than we had been led to believe. Chapter 9. The trigger. He awoke to the sound of urgent voices. Morning light streamed through the curtains as I hastily dressed and hurried downstairs to find Holmes in intense conversation with Miss Harrington. When precisely was the telegram? Delivered? Holmes demanded, his voice taut with barely controlled tension. Shortly after 5 this morning, Mr. Holmes. The messenger appeared legitimate, one of our regular couriers. Miss Harrington's composure had cracked, revealing genuine distress. I had no reason to question its authenticity. Holmes noticed my arrival and turned, his face grim. Ah, Watson, we face a critical development. Miss Montgomery has gone. Gone? How is that possible? I exclaimed, recalling the Manor's extensive security measures. A masterfully executed deception, Holmes explained, handing me a telegram. This arrived purportedly from Mycroft, requesting Miss Montgomery's immediate transport to London for her safety. The message bore all the hallmarks of Mycroft's typical communications, the particular phrasing, the reference codes, even the signature formulation. A forgery? An exceptional one, betraying intimate knowledge of official protocols. Holmes paced the room with restless energy. Miss Harrington acted in good faith, arranging for the waiting carriage to take Sophia to London under escort. The escort was not one of ours, Miss Harrington added, her voice tight with self-recrimination, though his credentials appeared impeccable. How long ago? I asked. Approximately 3 hours. Holmes checked his watch, giving them a substantial head start, likely toward the coast rather than London. The Baron's work, I concluded, indisputably, though not, I think, the Baron himself. Holmes turned to Miss Harrington. Has Mycroft been notified? Yes, he's mobilizing resources, but diplomatic sensitivities complicate matters. The Austrian embassy has formally denied any involvement. Holmes snorted derisively. Of course they have. Meanwhile, Miss Montgomery's life hangs in the balance. He gathered his coat and the case containing his notes and the medallion. Watson, we must pursue immediately. I believe I know where they're taking her. The observatory, I suggested, recalling our midnight confrontation. No, that location is compromised. But there is another site mentioned in Sophia's transcriptions, ATTC, private estate on the Sussex coast with specific acoustic properties. If my theory about the trigger sequence is correct, they will require such a location for the final extraction. Within 30 minutes, we were speeding toward the coast in a powerful motor car requisitioned from the Manor's garage, Holmes driving with a reckless intensity that reflected the urgency of our mission. He had telegraphed Lestrade to arrange police support, though we both knew official intervention would be complicated by the diplomatic dimensions of the case. What exactly do you believe they intend, Holmes? I asked as we thundered along country roads. The medallion contained what musicians would call a coda, a concluding passage designed to activate in the event of interrupted performance. His eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. I believe Sophia carries in her conditioned mind a complete encryption key that was to serve as backup should the primary operation fail. They need only trigger the proper sequence to extract it. But you removed the medallion. The physical object was merely a focal instrument. The programming remains embedded in neural pathways. Holmes navigated a sharp turn with alarming speed. What concerns me most is that such extraction might prove fatal to the subject. Good God, indeed. Dr. Chambers' condition suggests they have abandoned subtlety for efficiency. A crude extraction that damages the host mind would be of little concern to them now that their operation is exposed. As we approached the Sussex coast, Holmes consulted a map marked with annotations from his night's research. The Ravenscroft estate lies 3 miles inland from New Haven, originally built by an eccentric composer who believed certain architectural proportions enhanced musical harmonics. How will we approach? They'll surely have guards. Directly and with confidence, Holmes replied. Psychological advantage may compensate for our numerical disadvantage. The estate came into view as we crested a hill, a sprawling Victorian mansion with a distinctive domed music room at its eastern wing. Holmes parked some distance away, and we approached on foot through the wooded grounds. 2 sentries at the main entrance, Holmes observed through his field glasses. Another patrolling the perimeter, professional bearing, former military, I'd wager, armed? Almost certainly. However, their presence confirms our theory. Miss Montgomery is indeed here. We withdrew to formulate a strategy. Holmes removed from his case a small mechanical device he had assembled at Thornfield Grange, a cylindrical apparatus with tuning forks and resonating chambers. My countermeasure, he explained, designed to generate precisely the frequencies needed to disrupt their trigger sequence. But for it to work, we must be in the same acoustic space as Sophia during their attempt. How do you propose we manage that? A thin smile crossed his face. Your military bearing will prove useful, Watson. We shall present ourselves as Austrian, security officials sent to oversee the operation. They'll never believe it. They will if we possess the proper authorization. Holmes produced a folded document bearing official-looking seals. Mycroft is not the only Holmes with connections in diplomatic circles. Our audacious plan proceeded with surprising success. Holmes's flawless German and aristocratic demeanor, combined with my stern military posture, carried us past the initial guards. The forged authorization, claiming we were sent directly by Vienna to ensure protocol compliance, created just enough uncertainty to gain us entry to the main house. We were escorted to an antechamber outside the domed music room, where we could hear preparations underway, instruments being tuned, equipment arranged. Through a partially open door, I glimpsed Sophia seated in the center of the room, her expression vacant, surrounded by scientific apparatus similar to what we had seen at the observatory. A distinguished gentleman with a silver goatee approached us, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I was not informed of additional observers. Vienna has concerns about methodology, Holmes replied coldly in his perfect German. The previous attempt was compromised by technical imprecision. We are here
to ensure no further failures, the man.
These appear in order, but I must consult with Professor Kleist before admitting you to the procedure. As he departed, Holmes whispered, Kleist, the Baron's chief acoustical engineer. We have perhaps 5 minutes before our deception is discovered. And then, we implement our contingency. He patted his coat pocket meaningfully. Your service revolver may yet be required. The man returned promptly, his manner now deferential though still wary. Professor Kleist will permit your observation from the gallery. The procedure commences in 10 minutes. We were led to a small balcony overlooking the domed room, where our position offered both an excellent view and suitable acoustics for Holmes's device. Below, Sophia sat motionless while technicians made final adjustments to an array of crystal prisms suspended above her. A small chamber orchestra had assembled to one side. The same configuration as the observatory, I noted quietly. With refinements, Holmes replied. Observe the parabolic reflectors positioned to focus sound waves precisely on Miss Montgomery. As a tall, austere man I presumed to be Professor Kleist entered the room, Holmes discreetly removed his countermeasure device from the case. When the music begins, Watson, I shall activate this. Be prepared for chaos to ensue. Kleist surveyed the preparations with clinical detachment before addressing his team. Commence the extraction sequence, full intensity. The orchestra began playing what I now recognized as the Shimmering Waltz, its haunting melody filling the domed space with unsettling resonance. The crystal prisms began to rotate, casting fractured patterns of light throughout the chamber. Below us, Sophia's body went rigid, her lips moving in silent calculation as the conditioning reasserted its hold. Holmes waited until the music reached a specific passage before activating his device. A subtle, almost subliminal counter-frequency emanated from it, causing the crystal prisms to vibrate discordantly. Kleist looked up sharply, sensing the disruption. His eyes locked with Holmes's, recognition and fury dawning simultaneously. "Intruders!" he shouted. "Security!" Holmes stood, abandoning all pretense. "Miss Montgomery," he called out, "remember Thornfield Grange. The work we did. The pattern can be broken." All composure vanished as chaos erupted below. Guards rushed in as Kleist frantically directed the orchestra to continue playing. For a crucial moment, Sophia's vacant expression flickered with awareness, a momentary recognition as her conditioned mind battled against Holmes's counter-frequency. In that instant of confusion, I knew our next actions would determine not just the outcome of this case, but whether Sophia Montgomery's brilliant mind would survive the battle of wills now being waged for control of her consciousness. Chapter X: Discordant Harmony. As guards rushed toward our position, Holmes increased his device's resonance, creating an auditory dissonance that visibly disturbed the precise harmonics of the extraction procedure. Below us, the musicians faltered, struggling to maintain the complex patterns of the Shimmering Waltz against this intrusive counter-frequency. "We must reach Sophia!" Holmes shouted above the cacophony. "The disruption buys us moments only. Her mind remains the battleground." A burly guard appeared at the gallery entrance, pistol drawn. Without hesitation, I charged him, deflecting his arm upward as his weapon discharged into the ceiling. We grappled briefly before my military training prevailed, sending him crashing unconscious against the wall. Holmes was already moving toward the spiral staircase connecting our gallery to the main floor. "Cover our descent, Watson," he called, clutching his resonating device protectively. Two more guards appeared below, but their advance was hindered by the confusion spreading through the chamber. The crystal apparatus above Sophia had begun vibrating erratically, casting chaotic light patterns that seemed to physically distress Professor Kleist's technicians. I followed Holmes down the stairs, my revolver now providing persuasive discouragement to anyone considering intervention. The orchestra had abandoned any pretense of coordinated performance, some musicians clutching their ears against the dissonant frequencies. "Continue playing," Kleist shrieked, his composure shattered. "We need only 30 seconds more to complete the sequence." Holmes reached Sophia first, kneeling before her rigid form. Her eyes remained unfocused, lips moving in silent calculation as competing influences warred within her consciousness. "Miss Montgomery," Holmes spoke directly into her ear while positioning his device beside her. "Focus on my voice. The pattern you helped me identify at Thornfield. Remember it. Apply your gift not as their instrument, but as your own." A flicker of recognition crossed her features, though her body remained locked in the entrained state. Holmes adjusted his device, producing a subtly altered frequency that seemed to penetrate her trance more effectively. Kleist, seeing his subject, responding to Holmes's intervention, lunged forward with unexpected agility. "You cannot interfere. Her mind will collapse under competing patterns." Holmes blocked him with one arm while maintaining his focus on Sophia. "Her mind is stronger than you understand. You selected her for precisely that strength, which now works against you." I positioned myself defensively around them both, my revolver discouraging further interference as the remaining guards hesitated, uncertain how to proceed without endangering the delicate procedure. "Miss Montgomery," Holmes continued intensely, "you described the medallions' pattern to me. You recognized it not just as their tool, but as a mathematical system. Use that understanding now. Follow the counterpoint I've introduced. Something
shifted in Zoya's express. Realignment as though disparate parts of her consciousness were reconnecting, her fingers previously moving a prescribed pattern extraction sequence and tapping a different rhythm again.
Her knees. "That's it," Holmes encouraged. "Find the resolution, the mathematical conclusion that satisfies both patterns." Kleist watched in horrified fascination. Impossible. The human mind cannot integrate contradictory entrainment protocols. Perhaps not an ordinary mind, Holmes countered, but one with her particular gifts. You selected her for her exceptional synesthetic abilities, her capacity to perceive music as mathematical structure. That same capacity now allows her to recognize your pattern as merely one possible solution among many. The domed room had fallen into tense silence, the musicians having abandoned their instruments entirely. Only the humming of Holmes's device and the erratic spinning of the crystal apparatus disturbed the quiet as Sophia's internal struggle continued. Suddenly, her back straightened and her eyes cleared, focusing first on Holmes, then surveying the room with growing comprehension. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. "I can see it all now. Both patterns. They're complementary rather than contradictory when viewed from the proper perspective." Holmes smiled with profound relief. "As I suspected. Your mind found the meta-pattern, the unified solution." A commotion at the main entrance interrupted this moment of triumph. Inspector Lestrade burst in, accompanied by several police officers and the stern figures of Mycroft Holmes and Colonel Graves. "Perfect timing as always, Lestrade," Holmes remarked dryly. "The intellectual heavy lifting has been accomplished, leaving you the mundane matter of arrests." "Diplomatic immunity," Kleist protested as officers approached him. "This is an outrage against the Austro-Hungarian Empire." "Your diplomatic credentials were revoked an hour ago," Mycroft informed him coldly. "Your embassy, facing incontrovertible evidence of espionage, has disavowed all knowledge of this operation." Colonel Graves stepped forward. "Professor Kleist, you and your associates are being detained under the Official Secrets Act. Your equipment will be confiscated as evidence." As the police secured the room and began arresting Kleist's team, Holmes helped Sophia to her feet. She swayed slightly but remained upright, her eyes now alert and aware. "How do you feel?" I asked her professionally. "Like awakening from a dream. Within a dream, Dr. Watson." She pressed her hands to her temples. "The patterns are still there, but now they're accessible to me rather than controlling me. I can see the entire architecture of what they attempted." Holmes nodded with satisfaction. "The entrainment has been reconfigured rather than erased. Your analytical mind has essentially debugged their programming." Mycroft approached us, eyeing Sophia with clinical interest. "Miss Montgomery, I'm gratified to see you recovered. Once you've rested, there will be matters to discuss regarding what information may have been compromised. I believe I can provide that now," she replied with surprising steadiness. "The extraction was nearly complete before Mr. Holmes's intervention. I remember everything they wanted: diplomatic ciphers, naval deployment schedules, colonial defense, plans, but I also understand how the information was structured. I can identify exactly what has been compromised." Mycroft's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Most useful indeed." As the authorities took control of the scene, Holmes drew me aside. "An intriguing resolution, wouldn't you say, Watson? Miss Montgomery's mind not only resisted their programming but has ultimately appropriated their techniques." "Is that safe?" I asked with concern. "Her mind has been subject to extraordinary manipulation." "I believe so. Unlike their other subjects, she now possesses conscious understanding of the process. The synesthetic gift they exploited has become her protection against further manipulation." Holmes watched as Sophia began explaining something to Colonel Graves, her hands moving in explanatory patterns that reflected her unique perception. "She may well emerge stronger for having survived this ordeal." Later, as we returned to London, in Mycroft's comfortable government carriage, Sophia elaborated on her experience. The competing patterns, Holmes's counterpoint against Kleist's extraction sequence, had created a cognitive dissonance that paradoxically allowed her to perceive both systems simultaneously. In that moment of dual awareness, she had recognized a unifying mathematical principle that incorporated both structures. It was like seeing music as architecture, she explained. Once I understood both buildings were constructed from the same mathematical foundation, I could move freely between them and ultimately choose which structure to inhabit. Remarkable, Mycroft commented. Your particular cognitive architecture proved both your vulnerability and your salvation. Holmes smiled. The Baron's fundamental error was in treating exceptional minds as mere instruments rather than as active intelligences. In music, as in criminal enterprise, one must respect the inherent potential of one's materials. As London's familiar skyline appeared on the horizon, I realized that while the immediate danger had passed, significant questions remained. The technique developed by Baron von Hertzfeld represented a new frontier in both scientific achievement and potential threat, a method of extracting information directly from the human mind without the subject's awareness or consent. The implications stretched far beyond this single case, suggesting possibilities that were simultaneously fascinating and disturbing. What other applications might such technology find? How many more vulnerable minds might be exploited by those with fewer scruples than scientific curiosity? These questions, I suspected, would occupy Holmes long after the Shimmering Waltz had faded into silence, the first notes of a new symphony of criminal innovation to which he would need to compose his own counterpoint. Chapter 10. The Baron's Requiem. 2 days after the dramatic conclusion at Ravenscroft Estate, Holmes and I sat in our familiar quarters at Baker Street. The morning papers spread before us. The affair had been handled with characteristic government discretion. A small paragraph on page 6 mentioned only the arrest of foreign nationals involved in unspecified activities contrary to diplomatic protocols. Holmes smoked thoughtfully, rereading a private communication from Mycroft. It appears Baron von Hertzfeld has been recalled to Vienna in disgrace, ostensibly to face internal disciplinary measures. Will he truly be held accountable? I asked, skeptically. Unlikely in any meaningful way. His knowledge remains too valuable, his techniques too promising. Holmes tapped the letter. According to Mycroft, certain arrangements have been made. The Baron will continue his research under closer supervision, and with objectives more aligned with his government's official position. It seems a poor form of justice. Justice is rarely the objective in matters of international intrigue. Watson. Holmes folded the letter with a sigh. The true victory lies in having disrupted this particular operation and protected Miss Montgomery and the others from further exploitation. We had visited Sophia at her family's London residence. The previous day, Lady Montgomery had been overwhelmed with gratitude, though she had been told only that her daughter had been targeted due to her father's diplomatic position, a simplified truth that spared her the more disturbing details. Sophia herself had made a remarkable recovery. The haunted vacancy had vanished from her eyes, replaced by a sharp intelligence and newfound confidence. She had spoken of returning to her musical studies with a fresh perspective, her synesthetic gift now a source of strength rather than vulnerability. I've been thinking about the broader implications, Holmes, I said, pouring us each a fresh cup of tea. This technique, using music and mathematics to access unconscious information, could it be adapted for beneficial purposes? An interesting question with troubling dimensions, Holmes replied. The human mind contains natural barriers between conscious and unconscious processes for good reason. Bypassing those barriers, even with benevolent intent, raises profound ethical concerns. He paused, contemplating the curl of smoke from his pipe. Though Miss Montgomery's experience suggests that understanding the technique provides protection against it, a form of inoculation, one might say. Our contemplation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a small package. "This just arrived for you, Mr. Holmes, delivered by a foreign gentleman who didn't leave his name." Holmes examined the package carefully before opening it. Inside lay a small music box of exquisite craftsmanship, its wooden case inlaid with mathematical symbols similar to those on Sophia's medallion. A note accompanied it, written in an elegant hand. "Mr. Holmes, our symphony remains unfinished. You have proven yourself a worthy counterpoint to my composition, perhaps the only mind in England capable of comprehending the true beauty of my work. Though our governments position us as adversaries, I prefer to think of us as fellow explorers at the frontier of human potential. This modest gift contains no traps or tricks, merely a simple melody that may interest you from a purely theoretical perspective. The mathematics of consciousness awaits further development, and I suspect our duet has only begun its first movement." Until our next encounter, K.V.H. Holmes carefully wound the music box and opened its lid. A delicate, haunting melody emerged, beautiful yet somehow unsettling in its harmonic structure. "Is it safe?" I asked warily. "For us, yes. Neither of us possesses the synesthetic traits necessary for entrainment." Holmes listened intently, his head slightly tilted. "Fascinating. He's incorporated elements of my counter-melody into his original composition, creating a true harmonic integration. A peace offering? More likely a demonstration of his adaptability, and a subtle reminder that our intervention has informed rather than halted his research." Holmes closed the box mid-melody. The Baron acknowledges defeat in this particular encounter while suggesting future developments. The remainder of the morning passed quietly as Holmes documented the case for his private records, occasionally pausing to make annotations in a new monograph he was preparing on the mathematical principles of musical influence. An abstract, theoretical work that carefully omitted practical details that might enable replication of the Baron's techniques. Shortly after noon, Inspector Lestrade arrived, looking harried but satisfied. "We've completed the interrogation of Professor Kleist and his associates," he reported. "Most illuminating, though I confess much of the scientific detail exceeds my grasp." "What have you learned of their operation?" Holmes inquired. It was more extensive than we initially believed. Subjects had been carefully selected and conditioned at various social events over the past year. The Winterbourne Ball was merely the culmination. Lestrade consulted his notebook. "We've identified 27 individuals who were unwittingly compromised, each with connections to sensitive information." "And all have been located?" "All but one, a Mr. Frederick Chambers." "Any relation to Dr. Elizabeth Chambers?" I asked. "Her nephew, currently employed at the Admiralty's Cipher Bureau." Lestrade grimaced. "He departed for Malta 3 days ago on official business, before we understood the full scope of the situation." Holmes frowned. "Mycroft should be informed immediately. If young Chambers remains under influence, his access to naval communications could prove problematic." After Lestrade departed with this urgent message, Holmes fell into one of his contemplative silences, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he processed the implications of this development. "It's not over, is it?" I finally ventured. "Cases of this nature rarely conclude with neat finality, Watson. The Baron's methods have proven effective, if flawed in execution. Others will undoubtedly attempt to refine them." He rose suddenly, moving to the window to gaze down at Baker Street. "What fascinates me is how this case exemplifies the evolution of criminal methodology in our modern age, from crude physical threats to sophisticated manipulation of the mind itself. A troubling evolution, yet one that follows a certain logic. As society's protective systems adapt to traditional threats, those seeking advantage must develop more subtle approaches." Holmes turned back to me, his eyes alight with intellectual engagement. The criminal mind and the detective mind remain locked in evolutionary tandem, each advancing in response to the other's development. Late that afternoon, we received word that Frederick Chambers had been located and placed under observation in Malta. Initial assessment suggested mild entrainment only. He had been a secondary subject rather than a primary focus like Sophia. As evening settled over London, Holmes returned to his violin, composing what he described as harmonic antidotes, musical sequences designed to disrupt potential entrainment patterns. The melancholy beauty of these compositions filled our rooms as I documented the case in my journal, attempting to capture its essence while omitting details that might prove dangerous in the wrong hands. "You know, Watson," Holmes remarked during a pause in his playing, "this case represents something quite profound about the intersection of art and science, how beauty and pattern can be weaponized, yet also serve as protection." Sophia seemed to have found some peace in that realization, I observed. Indeed, her mind found harmony where others intended discord. He raised his bow again, which reminds me, she has invited us to attend a small musical gathering next week. She intends to perform her first original composition since her recovery. Will you accept? A rare smile softened his features. With great interest, I believe. Her experience may have transformed not only her understanding of music, but her capacity to create it. Some traumas, when properly integrated, become sources of insight rather than merely scars to be hidden. As Holmes returned to his violin, I contemplated how this unusual case had revealed new dimensions of his particular genius. Beyond his analytical brilliance and encyclopedic knowledge, he had demonstrated an intuitive understanding of the human mind's complexities, how it could be manipulated, yes, but also how it might heal and even transform through proper understanding. The mystery of the Shimmering Waltz had been solved, but its echoes would undoubtedly continue to resonate, not only in the lives of those directly affected, but in the evolving dance between those who would exploit human vulnerability and those, like my remarkable friend, who stood as guardians against such exploitation. Chapter 12. A New Composition. The night of Sophia Montgomery's musical gathering arrived with unusual anticipation. Holmes had been uncharacteristically focused on the engagement, twice reminding me of the time as the evening approached. The venue was not a grand concert hall but the intimate music room of the Montgomerys' London residence, a decision that reflected both the personal nature of the performance and lingering security concerns. Lady Montgomery has limited attendance to trusted friends and family, Holmes explained as our hansom cab navigated the foggy streets. Mycroft has discreetly arranged additional precautions, though I believe the direct threat has passed. We arrived to find the elegant townhouse illuminated against the winter darkness. Inside, perhaps 30 guests mingled quietly, the atmosphere more solemn than celebratory. Lord Montgomery, recently returned from diplomatic duties abroad, greeted us with profound gratitude. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, my family owes you a debt we can never adequately repay." His distinguished face showed the strain of recent events. "Adelaide has told me what you risked to save our daughter." "I assure you, Lord Montgomery, the intellectual challenge alone was compensation enough," Holmes replied with uncharacteristic modesty. "How is Miss Montgomery faring?" "Transformed," he answered thoughtfully. "There remains something altered in her perception, but not diminished, rather expanded in ways I cannot fully comprehend. Her music." He hesitated. "You shall judge for yourself shortly." The audience gradually assembled in the music room, where a grand piano occupied the center space, surrounded by chairs arranged in a semicircle. I noted several distinguished figures among the guests, musicians of reputation, a prominent neurologist, and, seated discreetly in the rear, Mycroft Holmes, whose presence at any social gathering was a rarity worthy of remark. Lady Montgomery appeared, gently requesting everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight. As many of you know, our family has endured a difficult period. Tonight represents not merely a return to normalcy, but a new beginning." Her voice steadied with maternal pride. I present to you my daughter, Sophia." Sophia entered to warm applause, her appearance markedly changed from our last encounter. The haunted pallor had given way to healthy color, her movements fluid and confident. She wore a simple blue gown, unadorned except for a small brooch at her collar, a mathematical symbol rendered in silver that Holmes observed with quiet approval. She seated herself at the piano, hands poised above the keys as she addressed the gathering. I have titled this piece, Convergence. It represents my attempt to express in music what cannot be adequately conveyed in words, how patterns that seem contradictory can, when properly understood, reveal a deeper harmony. Her gaze briefly met Holmes's. This understanding was hard-won, with assistance I can never adequately acknowledge. Her fingers descended upon the keys, and from the first notes I understood that we were witnessing something extraordinary. The composition began simply enough, a melancholy theme that evoked the traditional waltz form, but with subtle dissonances that created an underlying tension. This developed gradually into more complex patterns, the mathematical structure becoming increasingly apparent even to my untrained ear. I glanced at Holmes, whose attention was absolute, his eyes half closed in deep concentration. Around the room, the audience displayed varying reactions. Most showed appreciation, though several, including the neurologist, appeared almost disturbed by certain passages. As the composition progressed, Sophia introduced what seemed to be competing melodic structures, elements that should have created cacophony but instead achieved an uncanny resonance. The music built toward a crescendo that somehow incorporated both profound dissonance and perfect resolution simultaneously. When the final notes faded, a profound silence held the room for several heartbeats before applause erupted. Many guests appeared deeply moved, though few could likely articulate why. Holmes remained motionless, his expression one of rare and complete fascination. During the reception that followed, we observed Sophia engaged in animated conversation with several musicians, her hands occasionally moving in patterns that suggested she was explaining mathematical concepts rather than purely musical ones. "She has found a way to communicate her synesthetic experience," Holmes commented softly. "Her composition effectively translates between perceptual worlds." "Is that what I experienced?" I asked. "The music seemed to affect me in ways I cannot entirely explain, creating sensations beyond mere sound." "Precisely. She has adapted the Baron's techniques but inverted their purpose. Rather than extracting information, she imparts it, giving glimpses of her unique perception." Holmes accepted, a glass of champagne from a passing servant, but merely held it, his attention still fixed on Sophia. "Quite remarkable." Mycroft approached us, his expression inscrutable. "An interesting experiment," he observed. "One wonders about potential applications." "Artistic expression seems application enough, brother," Sherlock replied with unusual sharpness. "Perhaps." Mycroft's tone remained neutral, though I note Dr. Winters took extensive notes throughout the performance. The therapeutic possibilities for certain neurological conditions are intriguing. Before Holmes could respond, Sophia joined our small circle, her face flushed with the success of her performance. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm so pleased you could attend. Your presence means a great deal to me." "The honor was entirely ours, Miss Montgomery," I assured her. "Your composition was profoundly moving." "Indeed," Holmes agreed, "you have achieved something quite unprecedented, a true mathematics of emotion expressed through sound." She smiled, a brightness in her eyes that had been absent during our previous encounters. "I have discovered that what was done to me can be reframed. The pathways they created for extraction can be repurposed for expression." She lowered her voice. "Though I've been careful to limit certain elements, the full patterns would be overwhelming for an unprepared audience." Mycroft cleared his throat. "Miss Montgomery, The Crown remains interested in your unique insights. Should you wish to explore certain applications under controlled conditions, My brother's timing is impeccable as always, Holmes interrupted dryly. Perhaps we might allow Miss Montgomery to enjoy her artistic triumph before recruiting her. For matters of state, Sophia laughed, a genuine, untroubled sound. Please don't concern yourself, Mr. Holmes. I've already had preliminary discussions with Colonel Graves about developing countermeasures against techniques similar to those used on me. My experience provides unique perspective on both vulnerability and defense. Later, as Holmes and I prepared to depart, Sophia drew us aside for a private word. There is something I haven't shared publicly, she confided. During my recovery, I experienced what might be called resonance echoes, fragments of awareness from the other subjects. She hesitated. I believe the Baron's work continues, though in altered form. The patterns are evolving. Holmes nodded gravely. I suspected as much. The music box he sent was more than mere acknowledgement, it was a demonstration of adaptation. Precisely. I've incorporated countering elements in my composition, a form of inoculation for those with particular sensitivity. Her expression grew solemn. The Shimmering Waltz was merely the first movement, Mr. Holmes. I fear we have not heard the final cadence. As our cab carried us back through the foggy London streets, Holmes remained unusually reflective. What troubles you? I finally asked. I am contemplating the paradox this case presents, Watson. The very qualities that made Miss Montgomery vulnerable. Her synesthetic gifts, her mathematical mind, ultimately became her salvation. Yet these same qualities now make her valuable to those who would continue this work, whether for defense or other purposes. You fear she may be exploited again, albeit willingly? I fear the inexorable progress of knowledge, Watson. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. He gazed out at the passing shadows. The Baron has introduced a new methodology to the world, one that will be refined, adapted, and expanded by minds both brilliant and unscrupulous. Yet Sophia seems to have found peace, even purpose in her experience. Indeed. Holmes's expression softened slightly. Perhaps therein lies our best hope, that those who understand these techniques most intimately will guide their development toward illumination rather than manipulation. The cab turned onto Baker Street, where the familiar silhouette of our lodgings emerged from the fog like an old friend. The case is concluded, Holmes remarked, yet I suspect its echoes will continue to reverberate through other investigations yet to come. The melody changes, Watson, but the underlying mathematics of criminal innovation remains constant.